There is something seriously wrong with Frenzied Monsters.
Huh?
I don't think they're working as intended, and I've done a good amount of testing to get to that conclusion. In the current state of Monster Hunter Wilds, Frenzied Monsters seem to be the black sheep. They have a limited monster pool, and the Frenzy Shards they drop, main use is for Gore Magala weapons. They don't provide top-tier Ardian parts or high-rarity gems. They can't be mixed with Tempered or Guardians. They just exist. Frenzied Monsters first showed up in Monster Hunter 4, and since then, they haven't been brought back till now in Wilds. Gore Magala showed up in Rise, but since Quarios were the main theme of Sunbreak, they seem to replace and boast a stronger effect than the Frenzy. This might surprise you to hear, but Frenzied Monsters are pretty rare, and they're essentially the same as their normal counterparts, if not worse. Frenzied Monsters are specifically tied to the Ice Shard Cliffs area, as is Gore Magala. For the story, that makes sense. It's the only place we encounter them, and it's where they thrive. So story-wise, it's cool. I understand it. Gameplay-wise, it's underwhelming. You'll never get to run into a Frenzied Apex monster, a Frenzied Tempered monster, or Frenzied monster outside of the Ice Shard Cliffs roster. At least, not yet. There is some hope. Surely, they wouldn't just reintroduce Frenzy and not use more of it in the future, right? But would it matter? Let's understand what Frenzy does, and for me, just to make sure I got everything in order. I checked every website I could on Frenzied Monsters, from Reddit to the 5 different wikis to even IGN, and this is what I gained from all of it. Frenzy makes monsters more aggressive, have less HP, able to inflict frenzy on the player, and hit harder. Multiple Reddit posters claim that each one of their attacks roll a dice on how slow or how fast their attack will be, giving Frenzied Monsters a more unique experience. If that's true, then it's an amazing concept that sounds pretty fun. However, after fighting Frenzied and non-Frenzied monsters specifically for this video, if this concept is in Monster Hunter Wilds, it was unnoticeable. Frenzy monsters are seen as glass cannons. High damage traded off for less health. So, let's see that in action. The videos on the left are Frenzied monsters, and the ones on the right are normal. Alright, well, that's about the same amount of damage. After I overlaid it on top of each other, the normal Nursilla seemed to inch out the Frenzied version. Now I thought to myself, maybe monster stars have something to do with this, but they were both classified as a 3-star. Of course, I'm sure there's tons of factors I'm not considering and lots of different roles happening when you take damage. So for me, I don't see this as normal monsters do more damage than Frenzied monsters. I'd take this as they're the same. And then I figured, that can't be right, so maybe my armor is too high and has created a situation where even if there was a huge difference in damage, it's being negated by my defense. This footage was taken with around 360 defense, so I dropped most of my pieces and sat at 98 defense. Let's see how that went. Now that's a big difference, but I'm not going to let confirmation bias take over. I most likely got hit by one of the pincers, which brought me to an invulnerable state, allowing me to bypass the damage from the other pincer, while the normal Nursilla managed to land both pincers at the same time. I just wanted to include this specifically in case other people wanted to look into this issue, and it's to remind people that there's a lot of variables to consider when factoring in the results. Now, let's see how it actually went. With less defense, I'm taking more damage, and it still looks about the same. Here it is overlaid to show just how similar the damage was. Again, just the tiniest variation of damage done. This time, it seems like the Frenzied Monster manages to do more damage than the normal version by a pixel or two, but we're being fair, like earlier. Tons of variables to consider. A pixel or two difference is something I would consider the same. On the normal version of the Birahami, it says I have some kind of buff. I think it might be elemental, because even so, I still take a tiny bit more damage from the normal version. Only the tiniest variation of damage. Whew. I had a tough time with Blaganga because each one was pretty unique and refused to serve up the same moves. That, with its ability to use different hands for attacks, made lining up things a bit more difficult. I lined these up together. They're different animations with same damage output. I would say maybe Frenzy makes it so they don't have a wind up to their fist attacks, but I also managed to get the same animation just with different hands, so probably not. I tried my hardest to find a Frenzied Gypsaros, even though I could have sworn I've seen them in the wild. But you know what you can't find in the wild? A normal Yin. I checked spawn times and looked for them while looking for the other Frenzied monsters, nothing. The only way you can encounter a normal Yin is through optional quests or event quests.
That's weird.
Considering Yin is the first high rank quest after the story. But here's their footage. This one specifically was a little bit confusing for me, because I thought I had found some animation speed difference, but after further looking into it, I was slightly further away from the Frenzied version than the normal version, causing the damage to my hunter to be delayed. I lined up the animation instead of the damage here because lining up the damage shows a bit of a different picture. These are just a few examples, nothing was cherry-picked. I just didn't want to fill the entire video with test after test. Feel free to go back and check through all the damage, but it's consistent. Animations lined up, damage lined up. There were a few variations, maybe a pixel worth or two in damage, and those variations usually came with the normal version being on top. Regardless, I deem the damage to be the same between the two versions. And slight disclaimer, this was tried with enraging the monsters as well, comparing enrage to enrage and normal state to normal, and all monsters tested were made sure to be a 3-star. So after all the testing I went through, it seems like the glass cannon part seems non-existent in this version of Monster Hunter. It's more just glass and no cannon. The harder part to look at in a Frenzied Monster is the speed rolls. Since it's all RNG based, it's possible to just not run into it at all or not notice it. Through my damage test, I combed over the animations as well, and if there was a difference in speed between the animations, it was too small to notice. Let's look at the clips again, but keep your eyes on the monster and not the health bar. After looking through all the videos, everything just seems to be a frame-to-frame copy between versions. Earlier, when talking about expanding the Frenzy monster pool, I asked, would it matter? As Frenzy is in its current state, would it matter if other monsters got the Frenzy treatment? No, not really. Unless you're interested in faster hunts than what we already have. Frenzied monsters seem to be all negatives and no positives. You could say that having the ability to inflict frenzy might make the monster harder, but as long as you're on the offensive, it's just another buff to the player. And thanks to the power gains we've received in Monster Hunter Wilds, even if Frenzied monsters were pushing out more damage or faster animations, it just simply wouldn't matter. With the amount of wound staggering, status effects, and knockdowns, Frenzied monsters just don't stand a chance in this current meta of the game. Monster health pools are a little on the low side. Frenzied monsters, even more so. It's easy to put monsters in that wombo combo of death. Most fights usually start with a mount to a knockdown, then a paralyze because that's the best raw option, and into another knockdown. In that amount of time, you'll be just about finished with a Frenzied monster. So we're left with hoping and coping that something changes with Frenzied Monsters. On paper, Frenzy is a really cool idea that could add a lot of variance to hunting monsters that you're used to. And if you do find a Frenzied Monster, the thought process is as the following. Do I want to hunt an easier version of the normal version of said monster? It's possible that the introduction of the Frenzy is supposed to be contained in Ice Shard Cliffs until Gore Magala breaks out and wreaks havoc through continuation of the story. It's tough to say how Frenzy and Guardians would play out if they were combined. It almost feels like the same situation that happened in Rise. Guardian monsters that we've encountered already are hyper-aggressive and are feasting on monsters even though they have no need to. Kinda similar to Frenzy, kinda similar to Corios. It would be disappointing to see Frenzy just get pushed into the background since it's already happened before. Instead, what I would like to see story-wise is for the Frenzied and the Guardians to go toe-to-toe. It's almost set up perfectly. On one side, we have Gore Magala, the leader and the cause of the Frenzy virus. And on the other side, we have Arkfeld, the apex of the Guardians. Both sets of monsters exclusive to their own area, barring Arkfeld, but I'm sure Gore Magala will soon follow. It's got potential to be an interesting conflict. But to sum it all up, Frenzied monsters are the same as their normal counterparts, but weaker. They're pretty rare, and don't seem to have much purpose right now, unless you're determined to make a lot of Gore Magala weapons. There's already endless talks about how the game is too easy, which makes it disheartening that monsters that are supposed to do more damage and be more aggressive seem to be not doing any of that. It's almost insulting that they added Frenzied monsters to dual hunts. Hunts with more than one monster will reduce the HP of both monsters. So most monsters already have a low health pool. Then it's reduced by being a dual hunt, and then further reduced because it's frenzied. If you've done some of these hunts, you would know when it comes to the frenzied monster, it's like a quick pit stop before getting to the other monster. What are your thoughts? We already had Frenzied Monsters be a big part of the game in Monster Hunter 4, so maybe people prefer to keep Frenzy to a more one-and-done kind of deal. Maybe it doesn't need the spotlight again. Maybe we can all collectively agree that Frenzied Monsters should do something besides have a smaller health pool. Like maybe they should do more damage. Or be more aggressive. But thanks for sticking around and watching. Big thanks to the Patreon, and the link is in the description. Happy hunting, and I'll see you guys later.